Hi guys, my name's Anthony Cummins and welcome to this video. Now I wasn't going to make this video, but I've been moving around my YouTube channel and I found people have asked me questions on some random Google Plus page I never even knew existed. So sorry if you've ever asked me a question, I can't answer it. I get a lot of questions, some of them are so repetitive obviously about ninja and martial arts that it's just I've had to not deal with them. But I've just been given two questions that I thought were actually really good. I don't know if I can answer them fully, but I'll give it a go. The first one is Jiu Jitsu on a battlefield. The guy asked, he said, when people grab hold of collars and they've got all of this sort of thing going on, how do they do that on a battlefield with armour, and how did Jiu Jitsu work on the field of battle? Right, first step is we have to be careful about the term Jiu Jitsu. Now Jiu Jitsu, as far as I'm aware, now I have never found it pre-1700s, it's always been sort of post-1700s. I've always found the word kumiuchi or that you know, those older taijutsu terms. Now, but what this means is, we have to be careful here, is it doesn't mean like Jiu-Jitsu didn't exist, it just means its name changed. The locks and all that sort of stuff did exist. So let's first of all forget the word Jiu-Jitsu and just use the universal word of grappling. So, you know, grabbing someone by the lapels, cuffs and rough and tumble, getting in the ground and beating their head in with a stick, that type of stuff. So general, you know, grappling. So the question comes is, you know, people are like, oh Anthony, how did they grapple with armour? We have to remember that the end of the warring periods around the year 1600 saw a massive decline. So if you're thinking about the samurai, you can't think about the samurai as a whole. They have periods where there's just peace. So the samurai, while it's a dangerous place, while they're still fighting, you know, maybe individually, warfare is not happening. So let's stick with the 1600 mark. If you're in the Sengoku period and you go into the Edo period, the war and the peace period, you'll find that there's a bracket in the middle where the generation dies out and warfare is pretty much forgotten, i.e. nobody was actually at a battle. So these samurai who just wander around doing all sorts have never actually been to a battle. So what does this mean for the samurai? You've got to realise that most samurai on a battlefield died through projectile weapons. Absolutely. Archaeologists in Japan have been backing this up, they've been doing the research, they've put it all together and they've come to the conclusion that projectile weapons are the biggest killer of samurai. First it was the bow and arrow and then it was the musket. But of course, you know, it depends where you are in time. So most people on a battlefield who die with an arrow in their face or in their gut, or with a bullet shot wound to the throat and the whatever, and it all goes septic and they die. After that you get sort of spear cuts and then you get sort of sword cuts, and of course you can never know how if somebody died through Jiu-Jitsu, i.e. they were strangled out, but the point being here is that you don't really do Jiu-Jitsu on a battlefield. That is just not the place you want to be rolling around in the ground. Stop before you start, you know, putting comments on. Yes, some of the old schools, battlefield schools, do Jiu-Jitsu. But this is an absolutely last-ditch attempt. If you look at those schools, the Jiu-Jitsu from the Sengoku period, the Jiu-Jitsu is so small. I have actually got some, in the new Natori stuff we're doing, it does talk about this. It says, get off the ground. Don't even try to roll with someone. The minute a knife flashes out, somebody's going to stab you, you're done. It only takes one stab. And you don't die quickly, but you're pretty much going to die after that. So in Natori, it's like, don't get on the ground, get off the ground, get off the ground. Don't, you know, do this. And of course, you've got to remember that most people are dying by the sword. So where am I going with this? The point is you have to remember that you can't think of the samurai as one big thing. In the Sengoku period, when at war on a battlefield, which is what the question was, is what about Jiu-Jitsu on a battlefield? Jiu-Jitsu on a battlefield is a bad idea. It's not a good idea to get on the ground or to grapple with people. Now, what that means is the last-ditch attempt. First of all, you're firing arrows, you're firing guns. You get closer, the two sides rally off. You're off it with spears, and you've got what's called Ichiban Yari and Niban Yari, first and second spear, and you've got the duels to contend with. Then the two sides clash, and once the spears are useless, swords come out. And then when you're hand to hand, you've got a dagger. So Jiu-Jitsu is totally different in the sense of, grappling is totally different in the sense that even if you're grappling with a dagger. If your dagger's gone, your mate should be behind you. A samurai has battle servants with him. So servants actually stand at the side. These are called, they're like sort of side spears or side swords. And while you're fighting away, there's someone at the side of you trying to hit. They are not samurai. Or if you're a high-ranking samurai, they could be low-ranking samurai. So the point is, there is no standoff, grab, grapple, move in, sweep. It's just not there. By the time it gets to that point, somebody else is holding the guy down while you're cutting his throat, or somebody's holding you down while you're there cutting your throat. So in conclusion, grappling jiu-jitsu happened on the battlefield, but not like you would see it in a Koryu school where people do this and that. It's literally down to the ground. Somebody else comes along, starts hammering them with a hammer on the top of the head, drags you back up, and you go back to the fight. However, once you get into the peace period, those times have gone. This is where jiu-jitsu or kumyuchi or grappling comes into its own. This is where you get people who are doing, they've got no armour on. So to answer the question is, you wouldn't really grapple. You do grab people's armour and they grab around the sort of like the cords here. You see them grab behind the cords or behind the plates of the armour, and they do throw. But on the whole, they try not to. That is an absolutely last-ditch attempt, or the last thing you should be doing. So this idea of grabbing the collars and everything comes from the Edo period, or even in the Sengoku period when you're not on a battlefield. So the question is, how do you use jiu-jitsu on a battlefield? Is actually a good question, because it doesn't point to anything. You try not to. You really try not to. I hope that answers the question. Right, the second question is, how do you replace your second sword? So your wakizashi or your tanto. So people have talked about this. Sorry, I don't have my sword with me at the moment. When I did a video the other week, and it was, you pull the sword out, and then what you do is, obviously we all know, you put the sword in here, down it goes, slowly it goes back in, reaches back in, all that, very good. But what do you do with your second sword? Actually, I can't answer your question, I'm sorry about this, is you would just generally do it the same or just put it back in. But I personally, this is a personal opinion, don't think this sort of swordsmanship, put it back, ever really happened in reality. Or if it did, it was a bit different. The reason I'm saying this is I think that's a ritualized version that's been developed in the Edo period. Now, it's called chiburi, where you throw the blood off and then you put it back. That's absolutely not what you would do if you actually had a... And I'm not just saying that because I think so. I've read the manuals. And what happens is, when you've drawn your sword, you're killing people. Generally, it's either bent, maybe chipped. It's got blood and guts all over it. Now, there are two ways to clean this. There's quick cleaning and quick sharpening, and the long way. Now, there's a few ways to do this, but generally you've got something to clean the blade with. You don't flick it off. You clean the blade, put it back in. Then later when you get home, you polish it and do all your stuff and put it away. So I don't think this idea of boom, when people say, oh, you're not putting the sword away right, I think that is totally not how it's done. I've even got documents on how, when your sword's bent, how to put it back in the scabbard. You have to break the scabbard. So these people are like, don't nick the inside of the mouth. It's bad. Absolute rubbish, I think, because you've got people where they snap the scabbard because the sword's so bent it won't go back in, and then you have to put it in its travelling bag and carry it that way, because you can't walk around with a naked blade. So this idea of there's the perfect, put it back in and everybody sits there and they breathe, I think that's an Edo period ritual. I think in actual combat, once you've chopped someone's head off, you did lift the head and you cried out in victory, and you cried out with a naked sword in your hand, with the head in your hand, so you couldn't put it back that way anyway. So probably what you did is put the head down, you picked up some crap off the ground, some stuff, you put it in your paper, you got the dirt and you get it all off the sword, then you clean it, and then you put it back in the scabbard, get home and polish it properly. Absolutely. And I think that will go for the main sword and the second sword. So to round up, Jiu-Jitsu has been in Japan for a long time, way into the Sengoku period, but it's not something you should do on a battlefield. No. And how do you put your second sword away? Probably as easy or as in any way you want to. This idea of, these beautiful things is probably an Edo period thing, or at least not something you actually do outside of kata, i.e. when there's guts and lungs and brains hanging off it and it's bent or nicked or whatever. So yeah, no. Clean it, put it back in, whatever you need to do. There's too much emphasis, in my opinion, on form and etiquette. Form and etiquette is just totally after the data. First of all, you get function, and then an ability, and later form was produced to replicate function. What I mean by that is you had a shit-hot swordsman who was very good. He taught the people and they were just not as good as him and not getting it, so he creates forms for them to understand until they get it, and they're like, okay. And then what happens is when the good swordsman's died, the forms get passed on and then get diluted, and you're like, that's not what actually it was originally like. So that my idea of this, you know, put it back like this and all this breathing and standing is all just form and etiquette, and it has actually no compatibility or no reference back to its original function, i.e. scraping somebody's teeth off your sword and putting it back in the scabbard. I don't think it was anything like this. Nothing. Right guys, I have a new book coming out. Now all this information or things like this are in the new book. I'm waiting for it to come on pre-order on Amazon, but here's the front cover. It's not on Amazon today, and we're in August of 2014, but by the time you watch this video, or in a few weeks, it will be up. So if you're watching this video in the future, just go and find it. It's called Samurai and Ninja. Enjoy.